It always begins the same way. Not with a fight, not with a goodbye, not even with honesty. It begins with a shift so subtle it makes you question your own mind. The warmth cools, the messages change. Their eyes still meet yours, but something in them has already stepped back. Their voice is softer, flatter, harder to read. And suddenly you're standing in the middle of a connection that once felt electric, trying to figure out how you became too much without ever being told you were. That is the cruelest part. Dismissive avoidants rarely leave with clear words. They leave with distance, with silence, with a strange emotional fog that makes you replay every moment, trying to locate the exact second their heart closed. And while you're drowning in the confusion, they often look calm, composed, functional, untouched. But that surface is a lie. Because the biggest fear every dismissive avoidant tries to hide is not that someone will hurt them. It's that someone will get close enough to matter, and then reach the parts of them they have spent a lifetime trying not to feel. That is the fear. Not love itself, not intimacy itself. Exposure. To understand them, you have to understand this brutal truth. The moment real emotional closeness begins to feel permanent, something ancient wakes up inside them. And it does not feel romantic. It feels dangerous. So, while you think they are losing interest, they are often losing regulation. While you think they don't care, their nervous system is ringing alarms. While you lean in for reassurance, they are fighting an internal war between attachment and self-protection. And if you don't understand that, you will make the most natural mistake in the world. You will chase harder. You will explain more, ask deeper, push for honesty, try to love them through the shutdown. And every step you take toward them in that state can feel, to their body, like another demand, another pressure, another invasion. Not because your love is wrong, but because their system has confused closeness with engulfment for so long that tenderness itself can feel like a threat. This is what people miss about dismissive avoidance. Their distance is not always indifference. Sometimes it is overload wearing the mask of control. Their amygdala, that ancient alarm center in the brain, does not wait for logic. It reacts before language, before meaning, before the conscious mind can say, "This person loves me. I am safe." If intimacy once came tangled with criticism, emotional inconsistency, suffocation, shame, or a silent expectation to perform, then closeness stops feeling like rest. It starts feeling like capture. So the body does what the body was trained to do. It reduces contact, numbs emotion, withdraws into thought, creates space, finds fault, feels irritated, romanticizes freedom, tells itself, "I just need room." And the story they tell themselves sounds clean, rational, adult. "I'm not ready. This is moving too fast. I need to focus on myself. I don't want drama. I just don't feel the same anymore." Sometimes those things are true, but underneath them, there is often a deeper truth they cannot easily admit, even to themselves. If I keep feeling this much, I will lose control. That is why dismissive avoidance is so confusing to be on the receiving end of. You are responding to behavior, but the behavior is often a defense against inner activation they barely understand. They may not have the language for grief, fear, dependence, or vulnerability. but their body has the language. Cortisol rises. The chest tightens. The nervous system shifts into avoidance as survival. Connection starts producing stress chemistry. Distance starts producing relief. And relief is powerful. Relief becomes reward. That's where dopamine enters the story in a darker way than most people realize. We often talk about dopamine like it belongs only to romance, excitement, and pursuit. But dopamine also spikes around relief, around escape, around the sudden return of space after emotional overwhelm. So when a dismissive avoidant pulls away and feels instant internal quiet, the brain learns something dangerous. Distance works. Distance calms me. Distance saves me. Distance gives me back to myself. And once the brain learns that, it will keep protecting that pattern even when the heart is starving. So no, they didn't always stop caring. Sometimes they felt too much, too fast, in a body built to suppress. Sometimes your consistency touched the exact wound they organized their whole personality around, the wound of needing someone. Because that is the real terror. Needing. To many dismissive avoidants, needing feels humiliating. It feels weak, exposed, childlike, out of control. They would rather feel lonely than dependent, because loneliness is familiar. Dependence is where all the old danger lives. So what do they hide? They hide how deeply they monitor your emotional tone. They hide how much your disappointment affects them. They hide how often they think about responding before choosing silence. They hide how much they feel after they have already gone cold. They hide the ache. Especially the ache. Because the dismissive avoidant has often built an identity around being unaffected, self-contained, above the mess. But underneath that identity is often someone whose emotional world was never safely held. Someone who learned early that feelings create consequences, that vulnerability invites pressure, that being seen comes with a cost. So they adapted. They became the one who doesn't need much, the one who keeps moving, the one who stays vague, the one who disconnects before anyone can truly touch the bruise. And then they meet someone who doesn't just want their charm, their mystery, their surface. Someone wants their truth. That is where the panic begins. Imagine what happens inside them when the connection gets real. Not fantasy real, not flirtation real. Real, real. You know their habits. You notice their silences. You ask questions no one else asks. You see the sadness under the sarcasm. You feel the tenderness in them they try to bury. And for one brief, terrifying moment, they feel understood. That moment is intoxicating and dangerous. Because being understood feels like being reachable. And being reachable means they could be affected, hurt, needed, changed. They could become visible to themselves through your eyes. And if there is one thing a dismissive avoidant fears more than being abandoned, it is being emotionally known and then unable to escape the consequences of that closeness. So they detach. Not always because they don't feel, but because they do. This is why silence becomes the core concept you need to understand. Silence is not empty in these dynamics. Silence is loaded. Silence is a strategy. Silence is armor. Silence is the space where they regain emotional control by denying access to you and often to themselves. When a dismissive avoidant goes silent, most people read it one way. They don't care enough to speak. But that reading is often too shallow. Sometimes silence is how they avoid saying, "I miss you, but I resent that I miss you." Sometimes silence is how they avoid saying, "I'm thinking about you constantly, but I can't tolerate what that means." Sometimes silence is how they avoid saying, "I need you to stop reaching for me, because every time you do, I feel both relief and panic, and I don't know which feeling to trust." And your nervous system, wired for connection, interprets silence as danger. You reach out more. You seek reassurance. You try to close the gap, which makes their nervous system feel even more crowded, which makes them withdraw further. That is the trap. One person protests, the other disappears. One chases, the other hardens. One begs for clarity, the other calls it pressure. And both people walk away feeling unseen. But here is where the power starts to shift. The dismissive avoidant is often most comfortable when they are managing your access to them. When they can feel your longing without having to fully face their own. When they can keep one foot in and one foot out. When your pursuit allows them to stay in the protected position, desired but not fully accountable, emotionally significant but never fully exposed. That dynamic works for them only as long as you keep feeding it, as long as you keep proving that you will carry the emotional weight, as long as you keep translating their silence, as long as you keep turning your own pain into patience. But the moment you become still, something changes. Not game-playing stillness, not manipulative silence, not cold revenge. Real stillness. The kind born from self-respect. The kind that says, "I can feel this fully without abandoning myself to it." That stillness does something almost unbearable to the dismissive avoidant psyche. It removes the external noise they were using to stay defended. When you stop chasing, they lose the proof that they still have emotional control over the bond. When you stop filling the space, they are left alone with the very thing they were trying to outrun, their own attachment. And attachment feels louder in silence. That's when the mind starts circling. Why aren't they reaching out? Did they finally give up? Are they moving on? Why do I suddenly miss them now? Why does everything remind me of them when I was the one who needed space? Because distance feels good only until it becomes real. Temporary distance is relief. Permanent distance is loss. And dismissive avoidants often do not let themselves feel loss until the other person becomes unavailable in an emotionally believable way. Not dramatic, not performative. Real, grounded, gone inward. No longer waiting with their heart in their hands. That is when the numbness starts to crack. Their body misses the familiar contact. Their mind replays your warmth. The dopamine that once came from relief begins to attach to memory. The nervous system, no longer overstimulated by closeness, finally has room to register absence. And absence is intimate, sometimes more intimate than presence. Because now there is no pressure to respond, no immediate vulnerability, no live emotional demand. Just the echo. Just your absence moving through their carefully controlled life like a ghost they cannot turn off. They wonder what you're feeling. They imagine you with someone calmer, stronger, less available. They revisit your last words. They reread old messages. They feel things too late. Too late is the dismissive avoidant's favorite tragedy. Not because they want it that way, but because their defenses are built to delay feeling until the threat of true intimacy has passed. And by then, the person they cared about has often already begun the sacred work of leaving. This is why breaking the pattern matters so much. If you keep responding to their fear by shrinking yourself, over-explaining, proving your worth, or staying emotionally available to someone who only wants you in doses they can control, you do not heal the dynamic. You become part of its machinery. And the hardest truth of all is this: your love cannot make someone feel safe enough to abandon a defense they still worship. Read that again with your whole body. Your love cannot make someone feel safe enough to abandon a defense they still worship. Because dismissive avoidance is not just a habit, it is an identity structure. It is often wrapped around pride, autonomy, control, and the illusion of invulnerability. To release it, they would have to grieve who they have been. They would have to admit that their distance did not protect their peace nearly as much as it protected their fear. And not everyone is ready for that kind of death. So if you break your no contact every time the ache rises, if you keep translating crumbs into hidden devotion, if you keep waiting for them to suddenly become emotionally fluent while you bleed quietly in the background, you are not loving bravely. You are betraying yourself beautifully. And beautiful self-betrayal is still betrayal. Yes, they may care. Yes, they may think about you. Yes, your silence may haunt them more than their silence ever haunted you. Yes, they may come back when they feel you slipping beyond their reach. But that is not the real victory. The real victory is not being chosen by someone who only feels you clearly when you are gone. The real victory is no longer confusing your emotional endurance with your worth, because your worth was never in your ability to stay soft inside someone else's confusion. It was never in your ability to survive mixed signals. It was never in how patiently you could decode emotional unavailability and call it depth. Your worth is in your capacity to remain connected to yourself when someone else disconnects. That is power. Not the power of making them chase. The power of no longer needing the chase to confirm your value. And paradoxically, that is often the moment the dynamic flips hardest. When your energy withdraws from the obsession. When your nervous system stops organizing itself around their inconsistency. When your days stop revolving around whether they text, whether they watched, whether they missed you, whether they're scared, whether they care. When you leave the emotional courtroom and stop arguing your case, something inside you becomes untouchable. You stop performing availability. You stop auditioning for basic tenderness. You stop trying to be the exception to someone else's wound. And that changes the entire field. Because people feel when they can no longer feed on your waiting. Dismissive avoidants especially feel the shift when your presence is no longer emotionally kneeling before them. When you are no longer reaching from below. When you are no longer trying to earn a place they should have freely offered. That is when they often start to come forward. A message, a memory, a casual check-in carrying a hidden pulse, a softness they could not access before, a curiosity, a restlessness, a sudden vulnerability dressed up as humor or nostalgia. And this is the warning. Do not break the pattern just because the pattern got lonely. Do not mistake their resurfacing for transformation. Do not call a moment of missing you the same thing as the capacity to meet you. Do not hand your peace back to someone just because they finally felt your absence. Missing you is not mastery over their defenses. Wanting you is not readiness. Returning is not rebuilding. If they come back, listen less to the words and more to the nervous system truth beneath them. Are they more honest, more consistent, more emotionally available, more capable of staying present when things get real? Or are they simply reaching again because your distance reactivated their attachment without changing their structure? That distinction will save your life. Because your healing is not proven by whether you can finally get them to stay. It is proven by whether you can walk away from what once made you abandon yourself. That is the identity shift. That is where the script changes. You stop being the person hypnotized by silence. You stop being the one who interprets withdrawal as proof that you should love harder. You stop making a home inside uncertainty. You stop calling your pain intuition. You stop romanticizing emotionally unavailable people as if their mystery is depth and their detachment is strength. And you begin to see clearly. The biggest fear every dismissive avoidant tries to hide is not just losing you. It is losing the protective version of themselves they built to survive intimacy. And your biggest power is not forcing that version to soften. It is refusing to shrink in the presence of it. You are not here to prove that your love is patient enough to survive emotional starvation. You are not here to beg someone's nervous system to make room for your heart. You are not here to trade your self-respect for a chance to be understood later. You are here to become someone whose energy does not chase what withholds. Someone whose calm is not numbness, but self-possession. Someone whose silence is not pain, but discernment. Someone whose love is deep, but no longer desperate. Someone who can feel longing without making it a command. Someone who can miss and still move. Someone who can care and still choose themselves. That is when everything changes. Because when you stop fearing their withdrawal loses its power. When you stop needing their return, their absence loses its spell. When you stop measuring your worth by their capacity, your life opens like a locked room, finally filling with air. And for the first time, the story is no longer about whether they can love you correctly. It becomes about whether anything less than peace still impresses you. That is the new self. Not cold, not bitter, not closed. Just clear. Clear enough to know that being deeply felt by someone is not the same as being deeply chosen. Clear enough to know that chemistry without safety is just a beautifully lit wound. Clear enough to know that your nervous system deserves more than confusion dressed as connection. So let them feel what your absence sounds like. Let them sit in the echo if they must. Let them face the fear they spent years outrunning. But you keep walking. Not because you never cared, because you finally do. Because the moment you stop trying to be irresistible to the unavailable is the moment you become unforgettable to yourself. And that is the kind of power no one can withdraw from.